We're here to talk about special revenue funds, which includes project inspection, parking, airport, conservation property, as well as our enterprise funds, which are, of course, consists of the golf arena, solid waste, water, and wastewater. So with that, we'll get things, I don't believe we have any minutes that are currently to be adopted. So let's jump right into special revenue funds. And Mr. Manager, why don't you start with the project inspections?
Your Honor, members of the council, special revenue funds, item is 4. So you want to be on item 5, of course. So that's project inspection fund. That's page 129. On page 129, we developed, as you recall, this fund to utilize city staff to perform construction inspection services versus using outside consultants. Revenues and expenses are dependent upon construction activity, primarily driven by the economy. Fiscal year 2018 revenues are projected to exceed expenses by $351, less than budgeted by $2,100. Revenues budget to budget are planned to increase by $14,000, or 4.8%. Expenses budget to budget are planned to increase by $16,000, or 5.3%. For fiscal year 19, revenues are planned to exceed expenses by $800. The working capital fund remains healthy, ending fiscal year 18 at $27,000. We expect the fiscal year 19 working capital balance to be approximately $28,000. Be glad to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Manager. Any questions? Okay, seeing none, we'll kind of move forward with a public hearing on this item, which should be project inspection funds. Anybody wishing to testify? Seeing that one, we'll close the public hearing. Do you want to do the motions as we go along, or do you want to wait till the end like we have in the past?
Yes. The end is good.
Could wait, yeah. Wait, sure. Okay. Mr. Manager, that takes us to our next one, which would be parking.
Parking. This one won't be so quick. So I'm going to go over this in detail, even though I realize City Council is well aware of how this is going to work out, but really for your audience at home. The fiscal year 19 budget significantly changes the funding for this fund as proposed by the Parking Committee. The City Council accepted the parking rate increases in December of 2017, and with approval of this budget, would also increase the hours of enforcement. For fiscal year 2018, revenues are anticipated to finish the year $3,600 more than budget, and expenses are expected to finish this fiscal year $21,000 less than budgeted. The estimated net loss of $163,000 is $25,000 better than budgeted. The budgeted loss of $188,000. While the fund is expected to show a negative working capital balance at the end of this fiscal year of $12,000, fiscal year 19 is expected to bolster next year's ending balance by $44,000 and finish with an estimated ending working capital of $32,000. On page 133, fiscal year 19 revenues budget to budget are projected to be $653,000 higher than fiscal year 18, or 34% higher. This is due to the following reasons. $288,000 increased from hours of metering on the streets, $233,000 and more penalties due to increased enforcement hours, and increases in certain citation rates, as well as $100,000 in non-meter penalties, which will now be booked to the parking fund instead of the general fund. $73,000 increase in parking rental revenues due to rate increases, as well as an introduction of a permit system in the parking garage. $41,000 transfer in from the general fund, $19,000 increase from the Sears Block Tax Increment Financing District. As you can see, the Durgan Trust on the page, revenue is now depleted and no funding will be available for fiscal year 2019. Expenses budget to budget are anticipated to increase by $421,000, or 20%. This is due to a $204,000 increase in contracted services, $186,000 increase in debt service costs, $35,000 net increase in personnel and benefits costs. The projected gain for fiscal year 19 is $44,000. Included in the fiscal year 19 fund budget are the operational changes, and I'll go through those. $37,700 transferring the operations and maintenance costs from the parking fund to the general fund, on a prorated basis for those portions of parking facilities used by the city. $37,800 transferring a portion of an employee cost shared to the police department, net amount of a total of 3 employee positions. $3,000 transferring a portion of debt service cost to the general fund, again prorated. $93,400 in general services public properties cost share to employees back to the general fund. $25,000 of general services employees to be shared with the parking fund. $58,200 in snow removal costs transferred from the parking fund in previous years, no longer is being transferred. $66,600 in highway downtown services team member paid for by the parking fund. $9,500 in training, supplies, and materials. $12,600 in meter expansion, 50 smart meters and credit card fees. $63,400 in net revenue associated with meter expansion. $100,000 in non-metered parking penalties previously recorded in the general fund. So as you can see, I'm going through line by line as you can go back and forth, and you can see how these costs move in the parking fund. And that's really what this is about, is what's happening between the parking fund and the general fund. $7,500 in residential and encumbrance permit fees. $9,000 for pavement markings, pay-by-cell marketing support, and postage for additional tickets. $49,000 for 2 24-hour mobile unit positions. $133,400 in additional revenue from the new mobile unit. $30,700 for 2 12-hour night and weekend enforcement positions. $93,100 in additional revenue from 2 new enforcement positions. $126,700 in contracted maintenance for the school street garage, the state garage, and the store street garages. Proposed capital projects include the following: $70,000 in parking vehicle replacement, $100,000 in the North State Street garage, $95,000 in the store street garage, $45,000 in parking meters, $66,800 in surface lot repairs, and $25,000 in parking division technology, essentially to implement a dedicated website for parking. They intend to make this a one-stop parking information for pay tickets online, online renewal of permits, and leases. Looking at the pro forma, you have distributed pro formas for all the funds to you at once. You have the parking one. On page 625 of the parking pro forma, and I'll refer back to this packet that you have as we get through the rest of the funds. These these pro formas are also in Appendix F. Anybody watching at home who wants to look at the budget, they can find these exact same pro formas that you're looking at this evening. If you look at the pro forma as presented for fiscal year 19, the fiscal year 18 loss of $163,000 will produce a negative working capital of $11,900. The change proposed in the budget, fiscal year 19 would produce a gain of $44,200 and the ending working capital of $32,200. The next few years will also have some gains and losses, but as projected, the ending working capital will stay positive. In a year from now, we will have a much better idea of the results of all these changes and projections, and obviously make whatever changes we need to do as we move along, and be glad to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. Any questions for the manager? Parking fund. Seeing none, thank you very much.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, we have a question? Councilor
Thank you, Your
Schleich.
Honor.
Councilor Schleich.
So I'm looking at the page 625, and I see we have in 2018, this estimate $286,000 negative balance. But when I look at the estimated 2018, we have a positive balance of $151,498. Could you explain where that came from? How we wound up from a budgeted loss to a positive estimated balance for this year?
Sure.
Unless I'm reading that.
What's the first number you're looking at, Counselor?
I'm looking at the 2018 budget, fund position, ending working capital is...
Oh, the 158? Yeah, so if you look at the 2018 budget, that's what we budgeted for. But then when you look at the estimated number, that's what we're projecting is going to happen. So we're going to be a little bit better than budget overall. So we projected that we would lose $188,000 to go up a couple lines above that.
Right.
Instead, we expect that we're going to lose $163,000, so we'll be about $25,000 better.
So that 158 doesn't carry over to the next
Right.
column. it's,
Right.
So it's almost like the 2018 budget column, it kind of goes away a little bit. You really have to look at the estimate, and then that's the number that we use as we go forward to project through for the next few years.
I'm sorry to have trouble with third-grade math here,
No,
but
that's okay.
I'm looking at the 151,498
Yep.
in the estimated budget.
Yep.
I'm looking at the difference between the projected net of a loss of 188 as opposed to the estimated loss of 163, which is about a $25,000 difference, but yet we're looking at a $300,000 plus fluctuation between the budget and the estimated amount.
Between the budget and the estimated.
So the budget amount was a negative 158, and the estimated amount is a positive 151, but yet I'm only looking at a difference of about $25,000 in the estimated loss.
You know what? My mistake. The $29,000 that you see at the third line from the top, that number was plugged in incorrectly. It should be 151,000.
Where am I looking at that?
So if you look up just above the 158,
Oh, yes, okay.
that $29,000, that should be $151,000.
Oh, okay.
that's where we're starting. The
Right.
budget for 19 is from that 150, because that's where our statement says right now. that
So
we
the
have.
public schools didn't fail me.
They didn't, no, and I'm going to blame it on Excel, but I take full
Okay.
responsibility for my
Thank
Excel
you.
skills. Sorry about that.
So everything going out, everything for 18, estimated 19 out is all correct.
But typically, I mean, as I look at this, I've always go to the estimated, I mean, it's really, I understand what we budgeted, but it's really what we're going to be end up with in the estimate.
Once you
So go
approve
from
the
that
budget.
line and you're safe.
Things change immediately, right?
Any further questions? Seeing none, thank you very much, gentlemen. Open up the hearing on the parking fund. Anybody wishing to testify? Mr. Swiker.
Good evening, mayors and members of the city council. I'm Roy Schweiker. I'm delighted to see that there seems to be some sort of a funding for parking enforcement officers in neighborhoods. I just hope that means that it will actually be 7 days a week, not coverage 7 days a week, 24/7, but the shifts covered will rotate such that people don't know that there's a particular time that there won't be somebody. Like, you know, somebody at 11 o'clock on Saturday PM might expect a parking enforcement officer, might come by. And the same thing, you know, Sunday 8 a.m., they might come by. I know you don't have enough time to cover every hour every week, but the shift should rotate such that they can be covered each hour at some point in time, particularly if a particular time seems to be a problem. Second thing I have to say is I'm still unhappy that we are having to subsidize parking through property taxes. Apparently, I don't know how you can tell what's a quarter in a meter, but apparently if you look at the unpaid tickets, half of them are from out of the city. So if we make the same assumption that the people who are putting money in the meters, half of them are out of the city, then we could help out some of the taxpayers of the city if we charged a higher parking fee, and therefore they wouldn't have to make up as much in property taxes. And one, shall we say, opinion, which I will venture, which I consider to be a fact, is I believe that transfer from the TIF district is in fact property tax money that was supposed to become available for police and fire and schools, but the TIF district was extended so it could be used to pay for parking facilities. But to my mind, that's still property taxes. It should be going to police and fire and schools, and the users of the parking should be paying for the parking, which many of them, like I say, probably are not even Concord residents, so we could draw in some other money. I know that the city was attempting to get a bill in the legislature so they could charge people who didn't park for parking facilities. That didn't go through, but the interesting thing is the senator on the committee said, well, the state should be paying you for those spaces they're taking up. Mr. Cullen may remember that Senator Sanborn said that. And I'm not quite sure why we didn't get the legislation amended to say, okay, let's let the state pay for those spaces, we'll send them a bill. But it never happened. Once again, I think that, you know, we're talking $30,000, $50,000. I mean, you don't think that's much in the city budget, But these people that live in these big boxes with wheels, that might be 2 or 3 times their annual income. So that's real money, and we should be trying to bring it in. And lastly, I think that, once again, this business about the assessments downtown, I think if you called up 10 people in the city, 9 of them would say that if Steve Dupree paid $11 million for a property, he should be paying taxes on that $11 million, even if you have to get a bill through the legislature or go to the Supreme Court to see that he does, because we have been to the Supreme Court over property tax assessments and won. We have tried to get bills through the legislature. We should be letting the downtown people pay their fair share of taxes, particularly for stuff like parking. And I think if you called the same 10 people, 8 of them would say, well, probably the adjoining properties should be having their assessments going up along with it instead of going down. So here is a revenue stream that I think we are missing out on that is legitimate and we should be investigating. Thank you.
Thank you. Council 9.
Thank you, Your Honor. Mr. Schweike, you suggested that we're not charging enough for meters spaces. What do you think would be the appropriate amount?
Well, I would say that the parking committee has all those figures. They merely need to take that 200 and however many $1,000 that's presently coming from the TIF district and divide that over the number of metered hours, and perhaps it should be $1.25. I don't know the right number, but I'm going to point out that everyone wants Concord to be like Portsmouth, where they charge $2 a meter, including on Sundays, and our parking consultant recommended $1.75. So I think $1.25 is still, well below the range that might be the appropriate amount.
Thank you.
No one else? Seeing none, thank you. Anyone else wishing to testify on the parking fund? See none, close the public hearing. Mr. Manager. Airport.
Honored members of the council, you want to be on item number 7, agenda item number 7, page 138. Top of this page provides a summary of the fund, ending working capital, and I'll discuss in more detail as we get further along into pro forma. The revenues for fiscal year 18 budget to estimate is expected to finish the year $10,000 better than thought. Budgeted. Budget to budget revenues are up $14,000 or 4% due to the fuel flow markup in building leases. In regards to expenses, fiscal year 18 to estimate are expected to be under by $21,000. Budget to budget expenses are up $30,000 or 7.3%, mainly due to transfers and contracted services. Also included in this budget are $20,000 for general repairs to the airport, $5,500 for local match for terminal building, area study that will provide a short and long-term range potential redevelopment opportunities within and along the airport, and a $7,500 local match for taxiway A and itinerant ramp phase 2 of the taxiway. Proposed in the capital budget but not included in the funding are anticipated federal and state dollars totaling $105,600 for the terminal area study and $1.4 million for the taxiway A and itinerant ramp. You have the pro forma in front of you, and you want to go to page 626. Ask you to focus your attention on the bottom of the sheet in the line projected net. We planned a loss of $64,000 and now expect that loss to be $33,000. This will leave an ending working capital at the end of 2018 of $505,000. With a projected loss of $80,000 for fiscal year 19, the ending working capital will be $425,000. Declining the fund is projected to stay solvent through fiscal year 2022. We'll continue to look at all the possible solutions to improve the performance of the fund, understanding that the general aviation business is declining nationwide. I'd be glad to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. Any questions on the airport? Councilor Schley.
Thank you, Your Honor. If I copy these numbers right, when I looked at the CIP going 10 years out, the airport anticipates about a little over $18.6 million in capital improvements. With no, it's not anticipated that any general obligation bonds or taxpayer money would be utilized. but it appears as we're going along that there's not going to be enough revenue, and perhaps there won't be enough grants or funding from other sources. Is there any plans or any thoughts of how that difference is going to be made up, or are some of those capital improvements things that can be put off, or are those necessitated by federal regulations?
Sure. There's several answers to those, because you asked several questions in there. So I'll take you all back a little bit to 2005 or so. Up until about 2005, the city on an annual basis used to support the airport by about $150,000 to $250,000 on a regular basis, until the economy changed. More people were using the airport, fuel flow fees were coming in, and other revenues, and the costs weren't quite what they were today. So for a long, long period of time, the city was supporting that. The economy changed, our approach to the airport changed, and up until very recently, until really the last recession, the airport made money, which is why you see it has a very healthy fund balance. So the idea here is we're making improvements now while there is federal money available and state money available for the match, and we're keeping the airport in very good condition. If it turns out that the money goes away from the federal or state level, or we don't have the matches, then we can, there are projects which we can push off. However, comes the time when the lighting has to change to keep up with federal regulations, trees need to be removed, there's all kinds of things that have to happen. So, but that's quite a ways out. So we have opportunity to make plan changes to try to increase the revenue and move off costs, which is why the recommendation of the study. And as you can see, the federal government and the state government will pay for the vast majority of the cost of that study to look at this. So I think that will give us a better idea of long-term costs, looking out and saying, okay, if we're coming to the point where we're going to have to make large expenditures and we don't have the dollars, then you'll be able to have that discussion, and you'll know many, many years in advance before getting to that point and having the fund run down of what you want to do. So,
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Council Champlin?
Thank you, Your Honor. Given the scenario that you've just described regarding the fund and the other expenses related to the airport, do you feel that or you consider that the airport has a role to play in our economic development strategy?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think in terms of, just to show you how it keeps changing, when one of the races ended up leaving here, the NASCAR races, and then going to, it ended up at Vegas.
Vegas, yeah.
So one less set of, during that time period, many, many folks would fly in, they'd be here for the weekend, they impact the economy, but also think they'd be fueling up and using the fuel, which we then get a portion of those revenues, which help offset our costs. But also generated from that was the helicopter flights back and forth and additional usage. So I think there's a good reason for us to maintain it in very good condition. The terminal is finally going to be improved after 20 years of Councilor Bouchard saying, please improve the terminal. So that will be improved, and I think there's a lot more opportunities out there. There's properties that can be developed. We just got to make sure it works in such a way that it generates revenue that will then help support the airport. So there's only and really, if you can develop the properties around the airport to be airport related, because you only have so much of that type of property, then I think it'd be good for the economy, but also good for the airport.
Thank you. Thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you. Anyone else? Seeing none, appreciate it. This time we'll open the public hearing on the airport. Fund, is there anybody wishing to testify? Seeing none, we'll close the public hearing and we'll go to the Conservation Fund.
This is item number 8, page 141. This fund is designed to account for the revenues from leased properties and the acquisition and management of conservation properties. For fiscal year 18, revenues generated from leases are projected to be flat. Please note $25,000 will be transferred from the general fund and used towards debt service for conservation and property purchases. The Conservation Commission and the staff in the Planning Division have done a fabulous job again with the conservation work and the fund itself this year, and I'd be glad to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. Anybody have any question of the manager? Seeing none, appreciate it. Thank you. At this time, we'll open the public hearing on the Conservation Fund. Anyone wishing to testify? Seeing none, we'll close the public hearing. And that takes us to our enterprise funds. I believe we're starting on page 142.
That is correct. So item agenda number 9, that is simply the summary of all of the items. And then if you go, after you have an opportunity to look at that, you want to go to item number 10, which is the golf course on page 144. It's a summary at the top of this page, and I'll discuss the balance in more detail when we get to the pro forma. So after you've had an opportunity to look at the fund summary on page 145, you'll notice that the fiscal year 2018 revenues budget to estimate are projected to be down by $114,000. We're projecting membership to have a few more members than at the end of the year last year, and hopefully the greens fees will be up as well. Because we only book membership revenue at the end of the fiscal year, it's difficult to see full membership results until the middle of this month, June, or later. Estimated revenue items projections for fiscal year 18 are camps are under by 19,500, seasonal passes are under by 46,000, daily fees are under by 5,000, cart rentals are under by 14,600, driving ranges are under by 5,200, league and tournament fees are in and out account, so revenues equal expenses. Simulator revenue is under by 2,000, pro shop sales by 11,000, concession income is under slightly by 6,500 because the contract was finalized late, so the revenue is less than budgeted for 18, and advertising revenue is under by 7,500. As you can see, sales across the board have been tough. We advertise in local media, in radio, social media, promote specials, watch our local competition for pricing. We also work closely with the Golf Course Advisory Committee on recommendations for capital improvements, daily fee rates, and proposed membership rates. Beaver Meadow membership are among the most competitive in the area, and we've added a golf cart membership for this season. Fiscal year 2018, the golf course also transitioned to a new point-of-sale software system called T-Snap. The system has greatly improved customer service at the counter for tee time check-ins, cart rentals, product sales. System also allows online tee registration, and approximately 15% of the players now register online. Once checked in, you can electronically verify customers as they transition from the first tee starting time. The general fund supported the 2 golf course capital projects for fiscal year 18. The first phase of those projects are nearing completion. Those include the new pumps, the pump house, producing more efficient and dependable water for the irrigation system, and the rebuilt bunkers on the 1st, 4th, 10th, and 13 holes are completed, sodded, and hydro-seeded, despite Councilor Cohen's work otherwise. The fiscal year 18 budget for actual are projected to be down by $18,000. We had a number of unexpected repairs that needed to be addressed. We had electrical issues at the cart barn. Fountains needed major repairs, plumbing issues at the clubhouse bathrooms, and the kitchen dishwasher needed, sounds like my house, it needed repairs and ultimate replacement. Budget-to-budget expenses for 19 are up $14,000 or 1.3%, which is an increase due to wage and benefit increases and increased debt service. I do want to note the simulator has performed very well, so thank you for your approval of that. This year, the revenues are about $1,400 off from 2017, mainly due to the weather. Other projects that are proposed for fiscal year 19 are $310,000 for phase 2 of the irrigation project. This is to start replacing piping, sprinkler heads on 14, 15, and 16, and landscaping work on the 9th fairway. $100,000 to renovate the women's and men's bathrooms in the clubhouse, replace doors and windows in the pro shop, and electrical work in the clubhouse. Both of these projects are proposed as general fund supported and anticipate the debt service cost to the 2020 budget will be approximately $33,000 on a 20-year bond. In addition to that, we're buying replacement of the rough mowers and aerator for $75,000. So if you look at your pro forma on page 627, as you can see, the starting working capital in this fund is $11,000. and with a projected loss of $78,000. The ending working capital will be approximately $6,700 to the negative for 18. As we finish 18, I intend to prepare a report to council and recommend some general fund support, including forgiveness of the overhead charge of $76,700 to help balance the fund. To the extent that the loss is more or less, I will make the adjustments in this recommendation. As we look forward to future years, the fund is not projected to produce a profit in the foreseeable future based on current membership and daily green fee numbers. If those revenue streams improve, so will the bottom line of the fund. Fiscal Year Advisory Committee it will be reviewing all special revenues and enterprise funds in the coming year and developing strategies on how to best support these funds. In addition to the operations, Beaver Meadow is now becoming a year-round destination on several different fronts. The simulator lets customers enjoy golf throughout the winter. Trails are groomed by the Parks and Recreation Department for snowshoeing, cross-country skiing, and the pond is kept clear for ice skating whenever possible. The city facility is a recreational gem for residents throughout the year, and the clubhouse is the polling place for Ward 3. Glad to answer any questions.
Council Collins.
Thank you, Your Honor. Thank you, Mr. Manager. This enterprise fund's somewhat unique because it's a seasonal as far as golf goes. And so do you have any preliminary numbers, in the last 4 to 6 weeks about membership and or rounds of golf play or anything like that?
I can ask someone to. I'd like to bring the golf pro and the non-golf pro.
No, I'm the, just to clarify, I am the non-golf pro.
I just think it's interesting for the record that the golf pro wore a tie tonight, and I specifically wore my golf pullover tonight because we were doing his budget.
I like your shirt, by the way.
There you go.
It's a nice one.
Nice color
You
on
can
you,
pick
by
this
the
up
way.
at Beaver Meadow, just want you to know.
Picks up your eyes.
Could you ask the question again, Councilor Collins?
Sure.
You remember?
Would you like me to? Yes. In the last 4 to 6 weeks, my question is how does membership look compared to last year and rounds of golf this year? Is it up,
So
down?
membership is up to 210 members over last year, which was 192. The biggest growth in membership was in our young adult category. We had 12 last year, and we're up to 35 this year. Most of our other categories are pretty flat. Rounds in April were at about 2,300, and the rounds in May were about 5,000.
And what would you expect as average?
I would say that's pretty good.
Okay.
I'd say that's pretty good, rounds-wise. If we
Okay, so-
can extrapolate that over the next few months and grow it a little more in July and August and September, I hope we'd be in pretty good shape.
But if I could, what we've done is ask, as you know, in the golf course advisory, is ask Phil to focus on younger folks, bringing them into the game, showing them the value of the game, and actually growing that over the years, because there's a lot more value over the years in having more younger folks get into the game than some of the non-younger folks. And I think this is, and that's one of the pieces that when Phil came on board, we noticed, along with the golf course advisory, that was one of the elements that we were lacking. So we're really at the ground floor of this. So it's going to take a few years to build that, but he's already made great success, I think.
Thank you. And, one more. Sure. This has to do with the winter season, and I think this is the third year that we've cleared the ice, and for years we've been grooming the cross-country trails, but it's really been an emphasis the last couple of years of getting the word out that that's available. Do we do any population counts or anything about usage during the wintertime as far as ice use or cross-country skiing, or just?
I'm not sure.
Not actual counting of people, because they don't check in before they go to either the ice or if they go cross-country ski. We can just have kind of anecdotal, evidence looking at it and saying, the pond was busy today, or, there was a lot of people cross-country skiing, today. That would be the best that we could do, but we don't have any actual numbers that support it.
Okay, because I think it's important, because that's a very important asset of the city for the winter sports, that we actually have an idea of what
how much of that's being actually utilized going forward. Thank you.
Council Keach.
Thank you, Your Honor. Just kind of a general question to the manager. It seems like increasingly the enterprise funds have been made solvent by eliminating the overhead expenses. Is that, and maybe it came before FPAC, but is that something FPAC has discussed? Just in terms of philosophy, I'm not sure it's a good idea or a bad idea, but it seems to be almost a subsidy.
Sure. They've been looking at it from this, well, very briefly. This is something they want to delve into this summer and this fall, is looking at it from the standpoint, are the, I'll use, formula is too strong of a word, are the assumptions made for the creation of how you calculate those funds, to go back and revisit those, are they correct? Should you be using those? And given the technology today, do things really take as much time as it did in the past? So are those overhead transfers still in the appropriate range they should be in? And if you're also looking at it from the standpoint, because when you really look at it, there's relationship with all the other departments and the golf course. So whether it's the city clerk's office, if it's park and recreation, whether my office, finance department, and if you start trying to, what we've found is if you start trying to track each one of those pieces, you spend more cost and time tracking those pieces than what I think the value really is. So we're gonna do that's why I think it's not just the golf course. We need to do that with all the funds and make a determination of whether or not we're handling the appropriate relationship between the general fund. And in some cases, it may be there's more money should be coming from the fund to the general fund. In other cases, maybe it shouldn't be quite as great as we have it right now. So we'll be able to, I think, Fiscal Policy Advisory Committee should make a good recommendation one way or the other on each of the funds and whether or not we're handling it the appropriate way. So you should have your answer this year.
Great, thank you.
Council 9.
I'm all set, thank you, Your Honor.
Anyone over here?
I'll wait. Mine's not that important.
You sure?
I was going to talk about the restrooms, if that's okay.
Go ahead.
Brian will handle that question.
Over the winter. Actually, it was the end of winter, more like mud season here in Concord, when we had a significant amount of snow melt happening. The ladies' restroom overflowed. What would happen if we were to get a significant amount of rain and the same thing were to happen in the midst of our season? Would we have to close the course because we don't have a restroom?
We wouldn't close the course because we don't have a restroom. We would immediately bring in some porta potties for the immediacy of it, and certainly get it repaired as promptly as possible. It really depends on what the issue is. I think we would have to have a tremendous amount of rain during the season in order for that to happen. But I think that we would come up with a solution so that we don't close the course.
But this adds to why we need to upgrade our restrooms?
This is one of the reasons it adds, is to make sure that the restrooms are in good working order and look appropriate as well.
Thank you.
Councilor Ursuline.
Thank you, Your Honor. So I'm looking again at the 10-year CIP, and it looks to me that about, over the 10 years, about $5.4 million is going to be spent on improvements to the golf course. Of those, only 4.6 million, a little over 4.6 million, will be paid for by general obligation bonds or by tax dollars. So, and when we look at this year, and we're looking at, you're estimating about a $50,000 projected net loss. That doesn't include two CIP items specifically for the golf course. That doesn't include winter recreation of $410,000. In fact, and then there's an additional golf obligation, general obligation bond for $75,000. So I guess my question is and my concern is when are we going to have a vigorous community discussion about how we're going to go forward paying for the golf course? And if I could just finish up, I don't think that these are items that aren't necessary. My concern is that I want it to be very, very clear that the community is paying for the great percentage of these improvements, and that these improvements are not being funded by user fees as was anticipated or intended. So I wonder if at this juncture, I'll ask the question again that I've asked in the past, if there are any specific plans as to how we could reverse that cost factor from the community back to user fees and revenues from the golf course.
Is that to me?
Anyone up here?
I'll be glad to answer that question. So from my perspective, I think investing in the golf course, very much like in whether you're investing in the airport or when the time comes to upgrade the, Kiwanis Park and the arena, whether we're buying conservation property or anything else to that effect, building a community center. To me, they're investments in the entire community, and I don't look them as if the golf course can't support itself, then we should let it spiral down so it just becomes worse and worse. Not that you're saying to do that, but that is what the case would be. My thought is that until you tell me otherwise as a council, I'm going to continue to try to keep the assets that the community owns in as best working condition as can that we can afford. So I think the opportune time for that discussion is when the Fiscal Policy Advisory Committee returns to the City Council and says, and not just for the golf course, for any of the funds, and says, here's what we should do in terms of whether it's the overhead transfers or how these funds are going forward in the future. That's when you have that discussion, because I think you'll actually have numbers in front of you. And if you make the decision as a council that we should continue to invest in our golf courses, parks, community centers, then that's one thing. I'll give you an example. When I was putting together the original plan with others for the new community center, there's one road I could have gone down, which was make it self-supporting and make sure that the programs and the fee costs and the room rentals would all be in such a way that it could support itself. And if you couldn't pay to play, you don't play. And I thought that taking that approach, particularly, no offense, in the Heights, would not be the way to go for that. So I thought the community should help support that. So you can see the revenues clearly do not support the costs and probably never will. That's the approach I took. If the council wants to, if I'm going the wrong way, so far you voted to approve it that way, and I think we've been feeding off each other in terms of that, then that's my recommendation to go forward. If you want these things, if you want these types of assets to be completely self-supporting, then that's a different approach we'd have to take. So I think the time when you have that analysis, and particularly with the overhead costs, would be an opportune time to have that discussion. Unless you're already ready as a team to know what you...
Well, I would disagree slightly, and that over the years, I think that the council's role in approving a budget, which is probably our main responsibility, other than hiring a great city manager, we do set policy decisions by what we fund and what we don't fund.
True.
And so by how we approach this budget and the choices that we make when we take our final recommendation and final vote, we're making decisions. And so I appreciate the fact that we're going to talk about how we're approaching enterprise funds overall. That absolutely needs to be done, because I think that the last time we've actually looked at it, Jim Howard was sitting there probably. So it's been over 10 years, I bet, that we've really done the analysis to, are we taking the appropriate path? But in terms of whether something like the golf course, like conservation property, whether it be the airport, as you've listed all those things, whether they should be self-sustaining, I think is really part of this budget document. So, I mean, Councilor Schlag, if you have any ideas, I would encourage you to bring them forth now and talk about it, because I've not been one to support privatization of our golf course. Neither have I been supportive of privatization of our arena. Over the years, I've supported White Park, Rollins Park, Rolfe Park. I've supported the Conservation Commission and their efforts to create more open space, because I think these are quality of life issues that we have in the city of Concord. So if you want to change that policy, I encourage you to have the discussion right now. Councilor Schlag.
Thank you again, Your Honor. So my concern is that, or let me start. I'm not a big fan of privatization. I'm not a big fan of necessarily leasing it out. But there is a difference, I believe, between the library, between our parks, between our community centers. Those are items I think that the community has always understood are funded by the community. They benefit the entire community, not that the golf course doesn't. It certainly, even though not a majority of people play it, it adds to the community. But it's been the understanding since I've been here, and did the cross-country skiing at the golf course going as far back as the early to mid-'80s, that the golf course was self-sustaining. So what we are doing is we are changing the marker for the golf course. It's not that I want to change how we fund it. It's that circumstances have led to the way that it's become necessary to fund it. And before we get too far down that road, when I brought this up earlier, then I said, well, budget season's the time to bring it up. And now that it's budget season, well, it's time when we come back with a report from the Golf Course Advisory Committee. I think the budget season is an appropriate time to bring it up and to have a vigorous discussion. That doesn't mean that we can't have a community discussion at some other point or host a community meeting at the the golf course, inviting the community to come by and listen to what their thoughts are. And if the community says, no, we think it's very important that we have a golf course and we're willing to fund it, great. If not, what other options are out there? And then we would have a determination or decision to make. Again, I want to be clear. It's not, I haven't changed the marker on the field. It's that circumstances, and I don't think the golf course is doing anything wrong. I think they're doing a lot of things right. But we wound up with a recession, a depression, 2008, 2009. And just prior to that, we saw a large number of new golf courses coming along. And over that 10-year period between, during the recession, we saw a significant number of people who stopped playing golf. You have twice as many golf courses, half as many people playing golf. You have a revenue issue. And it clearly doesn't reflect on how the golf course is being managed or run. But I do think the community, that we should have community input in the community discussion. Thank you, Your Honor.
I guess, Councilor Sack, you've perhaps confused me because that's what this budget process is all about, getting community input. I think I was crystal clear is that now is the time we should be having the discussion if you want to privatize or not privatize. And I think I welcome the discussion. And first of all, I think one of the things the city manager said was that this is not just a golf course, this is a city asset. And I think that we all should be looking at it that way because no longer is it just something that is used for only a couple months a year. This is a piece of land which is used 12 months of the year. And obviously the weather has a lot to do with whether or not you're going to cross-country ski out there or not. But you can go out there and ski. The weather has a lot to do whether or not you can go out and use the pond to skate. But clearly I was there this winter and I saw some other faces out there and the pond was being used. And it was great to see people skating. It was great to see people using their cross-country trails and such. So, Councilor Schlegel, I strongly encourage you to bring forth your plan of how you'd like to move forward with the golf course because I think now is exactly the time to do it. And I encourage you to do it. And if anybody obviously wishes to testify, this year is no different than any other year. We have obviously a public hearing tonight on the golf course budget, as well as the airport and all the others. And of course, we have our final budget hearing at the end, which we can hear from everybody and anybody who wishes to come and share their thoughts with us. I always encourage people to do that. So, anybody else? Council 9.
Thank you. I just wanted to add that the city manager has already said that the Fiscal Policy Advisory Committee is going to be looking at the formulaic approach on how the general fund supports the enterprise funds and the interrelay. But I also want to point out that our enterprise funds have never really been self-sufficient, even in the context that they've never paid their fair share of property taxes. I mean, the golf course doesn't pay a payment in lieu of taxes for what its assessment would be in paying back to the general fund. So there's always been some sort of public support of this particular property. It's never been truly self-sufficient. I think I'll go back to what the manager said. We've talked about it at Fiscal Policy Advisory Committee. We're going to be revisiting it as far as what is the correct formula. But Your Honor, you said the same thing I was going to say. Is I know people who use it in the spring, in the fall, in the winter, and that's really been kind of the approach to it. So I agree with what you've said, and I also agree that if there's something specific I'd love to hear your ideas, if not tonight, then certainly at the Fiscal Policy Advisory Committee when we start looking at those formulas.
But just to clarify what I said, though, the Fiscal Policy Advisory Committee is simply looking at the formula for the money which flows to the general fund. That's how they'll transfer to the general fund. That's really what the Fiscal Policy Committee is looking at, is what is the appropriate formula for those outgoing dollars. I think the conversation that Councilor Hirschlag is asking us to have is we have these, what I think I heard you say is we have these large capital costs out there. Is it supporting itself? And if it doesn't support itself, should we be doing something else with the property, or should we do something else with, that land? So if you think we should be doing something else with it, then let's hear. I welcome the debate. I think it'd be a really good, interesting discussion. Councilor Kennison.
Thank you. This is on the pro shop sales. I just had a curiosity as to why you've got 135,000 budgeted for 2018 and then 123 for, wait a minute.
Well,
It went down. I just wondered why.
Sure.
And estimated.
Sorry.
Obviously, we work very hard at trying to sell as much as we can in the pro shop, and we think that we can hit a certain number of sales in the pro shop, and we're not quite hitting those sales numbers. $135,000 was a pretty aggressive revenue number in pro shop sales, and so certainly looking at the 2019 budget, we've tempered that a little bit too.
Thanks.
Councilor Credit.
Thank you, Your Honor. I just want to make sure that we're mentioning when we're talking about transfer funds that went into the general fund from the golf course and going back to the 1980s, that we're remembering that the golf course was contributing $90,000 per year for decades into the general fund at the expense of doing maintenance. And that what we're facing today is a lot of maintenance issues that need to be taken at the course that also have attributed to the increase in cost to maintain the course. So I just want to make sure that we don't miss that. I think for myself, I see this as a tipping point in that we're either going to make the investment that we can have an irrigation system that is what is required environmentally in our community so that we can present a good product beyond the great product we already have in this market. I would question Councilor Hirschlag to count his numbers on the number of golf courses. We've added one. And since the year 2000, it has not doubled. And I think that while there is competition in the marketplace, Beaver Meadow is doing an excellent job, and you only need to call and ask for a tee time on the weekends at the other courses to see how great we're doing. Thanks.
Councilor Hirschlag.
Thank you, Your Honor. I will stand corrected. I was just using an analogy or rough numbers to point out that there are more playing opportunities and less players. I would ask Mr. Chase to correct me, but I believe when the cart barn was built, of course I think Sid was there helping build that. That was the funding for that came from revenue from the golf course because they were generating enough revenue at the time. And I will, if I'm mistaken on that, I'll certainly be willing to stand corrected. And once again, it's not that I want to sell the golf course or see it used for other uses, but at a minimum, I want the public to know exactly where their funding is going. And when we talk about the other types of funding that we use, and we talk about the enterprise fund, like the golf course not being self-sufficient, for numerous years the golf course was bringing in significant funds that more than covered, if my memory serves me, that more than covered their expenses and generated excess revenue that allowed them to make improvements to the golf course, such as the cart barn, to add in electronic timers for the irrigation system. I won't argue, I'd be the last person to argue that those systems at this juncture don't need to be upgraded. The only concern and the only discussion that I'd like to continue having is how it's funded. Thank you.
So I have a question about your pro forma. One of the things where I think you've seen growth, and I give our Golf Pro the credit for this, is in tournament fees. How many tournaments do we do a year, a season, typically?
Are we talking like
Outings.
outings? Roughly about 45.
So, and these range in from large outings to smaller outings, right?
Correct.
So to attract the larger outings, what's the, let me say, a tournament with 130 people or so, that would be considered large, right?
That's large.
So what would be the typical revenue for something like that to the city?
To the city, probably about $8,000.
And how many memberships is that?
8.
So you can do
Roughly.
you can do 8 memberships in about
1 day.
5 hours.
Yep.
So it seems like a pretty smart investment if we were to continue to encourage those, right?
Yes, it does.
So it seems to me that from just discussion with folks, particularly larger groups, that one of the amenities that we lack that other places have is a tent. So for instance, this Friday, I think you have a fairly large group coming in. I think it's this Friday. And it's actually a group in Henniker, and they decided to hold their tournament here in Concord, which I think was great. But whether they stay or not depends a lot on their ability to, because after you play, this group of people will have dinner, you have prizes, and obviously they're trying to raise money for their charity and such. Have we ever looked into how much a tent would cost, and would it be beneficial to the city to attract more larger users?
It would actually be a very big benefit. There are a number of groups that actually would really like to see the ability to have a larger group, and having a tent or a pavilion or something of that nature would have a huge impact in us being able to attract and retain the groups that we currently have too. So that is something that we really should look at even more. I know that it has been looked at in the past. Tents range, a new tent ranged anywhere from $35,000 to $50,000+. We also could look at a pavilion and see what the pricing on a more permanent structure would be also.
But if a tent's like $30,000 or so, I mean, you'll only have to have a few larger tournaments.
Exactly.
I mean, for instance, I know the Boys and Girls Club. They hold one of their earliest ones of the season. Unfortunately, they left Beaver Meadow, and one of the reasons they left was because we didn't have a facility large enough where they could all gather afterwards. So it just seems like there are groups out there that would come back if we had that.
We'll take a much closer look at that and come back with you from some information.
Okay. Anyone else? Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you, Your Honor. I just want to chime in on this bandwagon on the tent because I've also heard that people who want to cater events, who want to get a liquor license for the caterer wants to get one because there's no permanent structure. Every time you put up a tent, if they rent one, it has to be inspected. Our own fire department has to go out and look at it, the fire marshal, et cetera. The tent comes down, another group comes in, that happens all over again. So a more permanent structure, I think, would also make it easier for some groups who are willing to get their own tent, but just the whole bureaucracy behind it, coming down and back up again, distracts them and probably makes them want to go somewhere else where there's a permanent structure.
We've done some preliminary work in the past, but let's put something together and bring something back to you.
Well, I just hate to see us miss opportunities and miss a significant amount of revenue because we just don't, because of the things that the Mayor Pro Tem has pointed out.
I agree.
Anyone else? See them? Thank you very much, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Phil, you're looking sharp tonight, buddy.
Thank you.
Now fix my swing, please. Okay, with that, is there anybody wish to testify in the golf course fund? Mr. Swiker.
Well, I wasn't going to testify on this, but I can't pass up your invitation. And actually seeing that, fine jacket you have, maybe I should take up playing golf because it really does look nice.
From you, I will take this as a compliment.
But anyway, I think that one thing that maybe you're missing is a difference between privatizing the golf course and, tearing it up into farmland or whatever. I mean, for instance, the Sunapee ski area, the state got a private manager to come in. It's still a ski area. And a lot of people would say that it is a much better facility. It's better taken care of there's more activities and so forth. The state brings in a lot more revenue than they used to. So I think that my suggestion, number one, is you should consider privatization not as, turn this into an industrial park, but if you got a golf course manager that was actually allowed to manage the whole thing, could they in fact create a nicer facility out of it? And no, don't hire an expensive consultant to tell you this. Say, is there anyone that's interested in submitting a proposal? Because we might consider a proposal to privatize it because we are facing continuing, I don't say losses, continuing deficits in the future. So that would be my first idea, is let's consider privatizing it, but it's understood it's going to stay a golf course and not turn into something else. And the second thing is, I think you might want to think about levels of service. You're talking about spending $5 million to improve the golf there. So someone might do a survey of the people that presently golf there. Would you be willing to pay X dollars, where you determine X by figuring what it would cost to pay for that $5 million out of the golf fees? Would you be willing to pay $5 a round more, if that's the right number, to have this superior golf course? And if the answer is yes, then clearly you should do it, and you should raise the golf fee as $5. If the answer is no, we would rather have the course as it is than pay the extra $5, then the answer is, well, why should the public at large pay $5 million to improve the golf course if the golfers don't think it's worth it? And the third thing you might even consider, if you think there's really an overabundance of golf courses. One problem I have with subsidizing the golf course over some of the other facilities you mentioned is there is certainly a feeling that people who play golf are, shall we say, more economically advantaged than people that don't play golf. So in effect, subsidizing the golf course is welfare for the rich. And so maybe what you think about is what would happen if you decreased the expense of the golf course and reduced the greens fees? Would you bring in a different level of people to play golf there if it was less expensive, even though the quality would be less? So, like I say, try 3 different levels. Make it better, would people pay more? Make it worse, would people come that don't come now? Or, leave it the same, and then, ask for people, are you interested in taking over the operations of this golf course privately, but it's going to primarily still be a golf course. Not that you can't have weddings or whatever else you think of, but, can you run it better than we do? Thank you.
Thank you much. Any questions? Mr. Swiker, I'm just curious. So with that philosophy, would you apply the same to the arena? Do you think the city council should ask to see if there's somebody who can come in and run the arena?
I don't see what you are losing by asking if someone wants to do it, because you can always say no if you think their proposal is not advantageous. You're not spending $20,000 for a consultant to say, should we privatize this? You're spending a certain amount of staff time to consider their proposal.
Mr. Swiker, do you think the city should inquire as to whether or not we should privatize our water system?
Well, I'm not even going to say no to that, and we'll get to the water system later.
How about our airport?
Once again, I think you should consider responsible proposals. That's not to say you should accept them. But if they could provide a superior product for less expense, everyone should benefit. Don't you agree with that?
Mr. Swiker, do you think the city council should consider privatizing our ambulatory service?
I would say if you can get a superior product for less money, yes. I don't think you could, but I don't think you should say we can't do it because it might not work.
How about our library? Would you think we should consider
If you
farming
think
that out?
I don't object to considering privatizing anything. It's just a matter of some of these things aren't going to work.
Do you privatize our elections?
I don't know why not.
The Constitution?
Thank you very much. Anyone else wishing to testify? Seeing none, close the public hearing. Mr. Manager, that takes us to Arena.
The other side. And members of the council, you want to be on agenda item number 11, which is the arena. You want to look at the revised agenda fund. On page 148, you'll see the summary of the Arena Fund, and I'll go into more detail as part of the next pages and along with the pro forma. On page 149, fiscal year 18 budget to estimate revenues are up by $19,000, and due to increased ice rentals and miscellaneous income, those were the results. Fiscal year 19 budget to budget revenues are up $13,000 or 2.2% due to the addition of the pro shop sales for skate sharpening and supplies. Fiscal year 18 budget to estimate expenses are down $39,000, mainly due to wages and benefits being less than budget. For fiscal year 19 budget to budget, expenses are up $62,000 or 10%, which is due to increased expenses to run the pro shop, and additional debt service costs, and additional transfer out for capital projects. If you look at the pro forma, which is page 628 of the packet that I handed out, you'll see that fiscal year 18 estimated gain of $44,000 is better than budget by $58,000, a very good result. Fiscal year 19 has a projected loss of $63,000 and will still maintain a good solid working capital of $203,000. While the ending working capital is solid today, the continued expected losses each year will strain the fund and will be required to search for new revenue streams. Based on this pro forma, the fund remains solvent through 2023. Major capital projects for the fund for fiscal year 19 are both under CIP 64, which is architectural design for the new lobby area and the purchase of the rental skates for the pro shop. Also, just as you note, chiller and lighting projects for fiscal year 18 were completed for this past year. Be glad to answer any questions.
Any questions? Seeing none, thank you very much. Open the budget hearing, public hearing on the Arena. Anyone wish to testify in the Arena? Seeing none. Takes us to solid waste.
Solid waste. That is agenda item number 12, Solid Waste Fund. We want to be on page 152. Solid Waste Advisory Committee has done an amazing job of working with the General Services Department solidifying the finances of this fund. Page 152 is a summary, and I'll discuss the working capital as we get into the pro forma in a few minutes. On page 153, fiscal year 18 revenues budget to estimate are up $24,000. For fiscal year 19, budget-to-budget revenues are up $201,000 or 4.8%. This is mainly due to increased revenues projected in commercial disposal revenue in the solid waste district. For fiscal year 18, expenses to budget to estimate are down $17,000. Fiscal year 19 budget-to-budget expenses are up $219,000, mainly due to projected increase in commercial disposal. You will note that the wage and benefit expenses are down, both 2018 estimate and the 2019 budget. That is due to the reorganization of the General Services Department, which you recently approved. And the solid waste manager has new responsibilities as administrative division head. While he continues to manage the responsibilities of solid waste, he also shares time with the general fund for these responsibilities as well. There is only one capital project for solid waste in 2019, which is $10,000 for the rehabilitation of the gas collection system in wells at the old Turnpike landfill. Looking at the pro forma, page 629 shows a projected gain for fiscal year 18 of $75,000, $41,000 better than budget. Fiscal year 19, the gain is expected to be $15,000, and the ending working capital is expected to be $1.28 million. Based on the projected revenues and expenses, the working capital remains above the target goal at least through 2024. The Solid Waste Advisory Committee will continue to review the solid waste operations moving forward. I'll be glad to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. Any questions for the manager? Councilor Schleich.
Thank you, Your Honor. I hope just one question this time. And it deals with the ending working capital and the target goal. And this also, same question for wastewater and water. Is there any advantage, disadvantage to letting those funds, the working capital, fall back or reduce to the target goal as opposed to keeping in funds in excess of the target goal?
Yes. So, for example, that's why you're going to see for many of the, particularly for water and wastewater, the plan is for planned losses for those funds. Sometimes they end up being losses, sometimes they end up being gains, but if you notice for the last several years, particularly water and wastewater have been planned losses for those funds. So looking at this one, because of solid waste, because you just made the recent changes regarding the revenues, and we received additional revenues from the solid waste cooperative, the Concord Solid Waste Cooperative, you can see that these numbers are slightly, the projected nets for 19 and 20 for the next 2 years are positive, not by much, by 14,000, 37, but after that they start to lose money and it goes up very, very quickly. So that's why when we look at, if you look at the last year in the fiscal year 24 of where we are with the beginning working capital and the ending working capital, they're very close. So that's the goal, is to be able to have you out several years in advance, so when things start to change, particularly as we get closer, those margins get closer, you are able to take the actions without having any spikes in costs. That's the idea.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Anyone else? Seeing none, thank you. At this time, we'll open the public hearing on solid waste fund. Anyone wish to testify? Seeing none? All right, closed. Mr. Manager takes us to water.
Sir. You want to be on agenda item number 13, page 156. This page is summary for the fund, and I'll discuss the working capital when we review the pro forma. Note at this time, both the water and wastewater funds, this past year we began a rate study for these funds, incorporating long-range plans for future capital needs. I expect the study to be completed shortly and a presentation made to City Council upon its completion. On page 157 of the water fund, when we get to pro forma, you'll see that I'm proposing a 3% rate increase for water. You'll recall that last year at this time, the decision was made by City Council not to increase any rates in the water fund. Fiscal year 18 revenues budget to estimate are up $184,000 due to a dry summer last year. Fiscal year 19 revenues budget to budget are up $346,000 or 5.8%. Fiscal year 18 expenses budget to estimate are down $143,000, mainly due to wages and benefit savings. The fiscal year 19 budget to budget is up $184,000 or 2.9%, mainly due to debt service costs. There are no significant operational changes in the water fund for fiscal year 19, and the budget plan provides $2.1 million in capital spending, including $1.2 million on water main replacement and construction, $118,000 on water plant improvements, $100,000 on pump station improvements, $125,000 on water meter replacements, $143,000 on water portion of the comp repairs, $63,000 on hydrant and valve replacement, $157,000 of the water portion for vehicle equipment replacement, and $90,000 on a water system asset management program. Pro forma is on page 630 of what I handed out, or the package I handed out earlier. At this time last year, we projected a $290,000, Councilor Herzog, this goes to your question earlier, it projected a $290,000 loss in this fund. Current estimates show this fund will recognize a $37,000 gain. In fiscal year 19, this fund is anticipating a loss of $127,000. Last year, the pro forma anticipated a rate increase of 5.5% for fiscal year 19. The proposal now is to reduce that to 3% for your consideration, obviously less than last year's projection. Projected ending working capital for fiscal year 19 is very solid, and the fund remains solid through fiscal year 23 with future projected rate changes. If you look at the graph, you should have that as the next page behind the water pro forma. Comparison to other communities you've asked us to compare ourselves to, you'll see Concord has dropped to the second lowest rate of the comparable communities, second only to Manchester on annual customer consumption costs, because the City Council has taken a very proactive approach to managing this fund. Be glad to answer any questions.
Who has questions? Councilor Slay.
Thank you again, Your Honor. Does the ratio between the ending working capital and the target working capital as we go in the out years, does that assume a rate increase each year, or does that just assume the rate increase this year?
Yeah, it assumes each year. So if you go up to about the middle, just above.
Oh, yes, okay, thank
See
you.
that? Okay. And of course, we revisit those each and every year depending on whether or not we end up with a loss or a gain. So if you could imagine, this time last year, we weren't expecting a gain in the fund, we were expecting a loss, so therefore the rate increase would have to be higher to meet those ending working capital numbers.
Mayor Pro Tem.
That was my question, thank you.
Council Keach.
Thank you, Your Honor. Mr. Manager, with regard to revenue and line item commercial sales, almost $500,000 less revenue. Do we know why that happened? How that happened? I'm sorry. No, I read it wrong. I withdraw the question.
That was a great question, if I go.
Wrong direction.
That's a better answer.
Much better answer.
Okay.
I'm good, thank you.
You all right? Okay.
Seeing none, thank you very much. At this time, we'll have the public hearing on the water fund. Anyone wishing to testify on the water fund? Mr. Swiker.
Hello again, everybody. I was either fortunate or unfortunate enough to inherit an elderly house in the city. And one of the things I did was I tried to go through, cure all the plumbing leaks and that sort of stuff. And I managed to cut my water use in half, from 2 units to 1. On the other hand, I didn't cut my water bill in half. It stayed the same. And then during the drought we had a couple Augusts ago, I managed to actually cut my use to 0. Not that I used 0, but I didn't use enough to even turn the meter over once. I still paid the same amount, because in this city, the policy is you pay for 2 units of water, whether you use them or not. And this is the sort of thing that I think the Sustainability Committee should be looking into, is if, they're trying to get people to conserve water, go from 10 units to 9, why isn't going from 2 to 1 the same sort of a good thing? Why isn't there a minimum of 1 instead of 2? And I tried to find out what the costs of maintaining an account were. I'm told that if you read all the meters at the same time, it costs 36 cents to read a meter. You can send out all the bills at the same time. It costs 60 cents to send out a bill. So you're talking about $1, for the overhead of handling this account. Whereas you're paying something like $11 for each unit of water. So if you were to cut the minimum from 2 to 1, it occurs to me that you would still be well more than covering the expense of sending out those bills. There's something like 1,000 people that, or 1,000 accounts that use less than 2 units of water. So this might cost you $140,000 a year if all of them went down exactly to 1 instead of 2. And out of $14 million in water and sewer bills, that's 1%. So the question is, should the people that actually use the water pay an extra 1% so that the people that don't have to pay for it? And I would certainly say that if you are really trying to be the green city and support conservation, you should go to the minimum of 1. I didn't say a minimum of 0. There is a charge. I will point out that 1 month I actually had a reading of -1. And fortunately, when I had a reading of -1, I did not get charged for 2 units. I only got charged for half a unit. I didn't get a credit. But, once again, I think going to 1 unit is fair, but why is it 2? Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions? Mr. Swiker, I encourage you to drink our water. It's outstanding water, and you should stay hydrated.
Number 1.
In fact, I do. I do
Right.
not buy bottled water, but I just can't drink enough to use up my 2 units.
Anyone else? Thank you. Okay, seeing none, okay, we'll close the public hearing. And Mr. Manager, that takes us to wastewater.
And remember, the councils, you ought to be on agenda item number 14. Starts on page 160. This is a summary. If you go to page 161, we'll review that. Fiscal year 18 revenues budget to estimate. Revenues are up $83,000. For fiscal year 19 budget to budget, up $49,000 or 0.7%. For fiscal year 18 budget to estimate are down $155,000 in expense. Fiscal year 19 budget to budget are up $342,000 or 4.3%. This is mainly due to an increase of $187,000 in debt service costs, wage and benefit increases, and utility increases. There are no significant changes in the wastewater fund for fiscal year 19. This budget plan provides $3.9 million in capital spending, including $2.5 million for the Hall Street plant improvements, $500,000 for Hall Street odor control improvements, $225,000 for Pennacook plant improvements, $290,000 for sewer main rehabilitation and construction, $143,000 in sewer portion of the comp improvements, $156,000 in wastewater portion of vehicle and equipment improvements. If you look at the pro forma on page 631, this time last year we projected a $469,000 planned loss in position. Based on the current estimates, the fund will recognize a $231,000 loss, $238,000 better than expected. For fiscal year 19, the fund is projecting a loss of $762,000, and I'm proposing a rate increase of 4%. Last year at this time, it was projected the rate increase would be 5.5%, but because of our good results, we've reduced that to 4%. The current working capital is solid and is projected to remain solid through 2024 with regular rate changes. Debt service on capital projects is driving the increases each year. We've talked about this at earlier times. The plant is aging and needs major repairs. If you look at the rate graph comparison to other communities, which you'll see behind that sheet, Concord remains very competitive on an annual consumption cost. Your City Council takes a very proactive approach in managing the fund. Glad to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you, Your Honor. Mr. Manager, the additional odor control improvements, are those part of the phased odor controls that we've been working on, or are those something separate? Sure.
Mr. Chesley and Mr. Driscoll.
So real brief, before we started the major odor initiative, had to be almost 6-7 years ago, there was some work done as far as odor mitigation years ago at the wastewater treatment plant. And what we're doing now is repairing some of that odor work. Dan can speak to the details to it, but it had to deal with sludge. Yeah, mix up the sludge.
Yeah, so the original odor control system was installed in about 1994. It's been running continuously since then. We're starting to have failures of blowers, fans, pumps, and we had a consultant do a little bit of a survey for us to identify what needed to be done to get another 15 to 20 years out of the equipment. This is the most economical way of getting extra life out of this equipment.
Great. As a comment, the odor control improvements have been pretty good. I mean, I haven't received any complaints now in a good year and a half, 2 years. So what you've done has been outstanding.
Thank you. Thank you.
And these two gentlemen.
Thank you.
It's somebody else. Who else was it?
Right.
Sorry.
Thank you, Your Honor. More really just of a comment, just for folks at home who are hearing 3% and so forth from our city manager, and if I'm wrong about this, you can correct me, but I believe that when you add up that percentage increase for sewer and water on 8,000 cubic feet of use a year, we're talking about a $20 increase, basically. When you talk about water and sewer, so for folks at home wondering what that means for that kind of usage, you're talking about $20 a year.
It's a great question. And the dollars are going right into, as you notice, we've been skinning the staff down continuously. The dollars are going right into the plants themselves. And if it's not the plants, it's the distribution or the collection systems. It's all the capital expenditures is really where the folks' money's being spent.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Okay, seeing none. Thank you very much, gentlemen.
Thank you. That concludes my comments for the evening.
Yep. We'll open the public hearing on the wastewater budget. Anyone wishing to testify on the wastewater budget? Seeing none, we'll close the public hearing. Okay, it takes us to our action phase. And is there a motion on the project inspections funds?
Move tentative approval.
Second.
Motion made, seconded to tentatively approve the project inspection funds. All in favor say, is there any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? The ayes have it. Is there a motion on the parking fund?
Move tentative approval on the parking fund.
We have a motion to tentatively approve. The motion has been duly seconded. And is there any discussion? Seeing no discussion, ready for the vote. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed?
No.
The ayes have it.
No.
Recognized, but the ayes did have it. The airport fund.
Move tentative approval.
Motion made and seconded to tentatively approve the airport fund. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? And the ayes have it. Conservation Property Fund. Motion made and seconded to tentatively approve the Conservation Property Fund. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? And the ayes have it. Are you getting the, thank you. Takes us to our enterprise funds. Is there a motion on the golf course?
Move tentative approval.
Second.
Motion made and seconded to tentatively approve the golf course fund. Any discussion? I would just simply add that after tonight's discussion, if there are people who wish to come to talk about the golf fund and whether or not the golf course should be privatized or leased out or whatever it might be, I strongly suggest that people come to testify at the public hearing on the whole budget. With that, seeing no further discussion, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed?
No.
And the ayes have it. The arena fund.
Move tentative approval.
Motion made and seconded to approve the arena fund. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? The ayes have it. The motion is totally adopted. Solid waste fund. Motion made and seconded to totally approve the solid waste budget. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? And the ayes have it. Water fund.
Move approval.
Second.
Motion made and seconded to tentatively approve the water fund. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? And the ayes have it. And our wastewater fund.
Move approval.
Second.
Motion made and seconded to tentatively approve the wastewater fund. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? And the ayes have it. Motion is adopted. That concludes this evening's items on the agenda. I want to talk a little bit about, we meet again on Thursday. Just want to talk about that quickly. For those of you, if you looked at the agenda, you'll notice that we'll be taking up compensation adjustment, which is done in non-public. We'll talk about the capital improvement program, which includes the TIF districts, and also the our capital budget. Yeah, capital, thank you. I would just like to, since we're starting at 5:30, there are people I know who will be coming to talk about the capital improvement budget and our CIP. So what we do is start at 5:30 with the CIP, hold the non-public discussion on compensation adjustments after that. Okay, just flip them. That way we don't have people waiting to come testify. Usually compensation adjustment happens very quickly, but just for purposes of the public coming to participate, let's do that first, and then we can do the compensation adjustment afterwards. And I would simply add, Sue, if you would mind adding noticing, as well as the compensation adjustment, we'll also be meeting in accordance with RSA 91A to talk about manager's evaluation. Just add that on Thursday. Does anybody else have anything else? Did I miss anything? Councilor Bouchard.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And the date for the public to come to comment on any part of the budget is that June 14th?
Right now, we have scheduled a meeting for June 11th, which is the
June
work, no, hold on, which is the work session. But I think anybody who is going to follow along with the budget and which is on the 14th, as you've indicated correctly, that is the public hearing for the budget. But I think they're definitely going to want to pay attention to the June 11th conversation. Typically, I would hope that if anybody has any changes they'd like to present, they could do it during the work session so that we can have a full, healthy discussion, a public dialogue discussion, which I think is critically important, so that when people come on the 14th, no one is surprised by last-minute type, moves. Obviously, it's your prerogative to wait till the 14th. That I understand, absolutely, that's part of the process. But I would simply, Mr. LeBron, do you have something to add?
Just to note, the 11th is the regular council meeting.
Okay, I could be wrong.
Could be. It's rare.
Why don't you come to the 11th as well? So when you come to the 11th to a
We'll do
regular
anything to get
schedule.
people to come to the council meeting. On the 14th is the
Was
committee
it pretty
work
good how
session.
he made you say I was wrong, Swayze?
That's how it works there.
Your management.
Committee
Anyway,
work,
bottom
committee
line
work
is,
session is
if-
5.
If we have a healthy work session.
Yes.
And it takes us longer,
Then you just-
then obviously we can go to another date for a public hearing. But as you've indicated, June 14th is the date for the public hearing on the budget. But I don't want people to feel limited or rushed because of that. I would much rather have good discussions and not feel limiting by time than to rush a public hearing. So yes, the public hearing is scheduled for the 14th, but I want to make sure we have a really healthy, good discussion about anything in this budget. Because as I indicated before, I believe, and I hope you might concur, that many of the decisions that we make in this budget really are directing policy. So with that, is there any further questions? Councilor Bouchard, thank you for that question. Okay, seeing no other, have a wonderful Monday evening, and we'll see you again on Thursday.
Thank you.
Yes, right.